Hey guys, hope you all are doing great. Hetu this side, and today I'm going to take up this question, and which is probably the second question in any SDET or test automation engineering interview question. Because after asking, tell me about yourself, this can be the second question, right? A third question, definitely, if you're going for the role of SDET engineer or ETL test automation engineer, definitely they will be asking you this question and you should be ready to answer. If you're not able to answer this question, probably then they will judge you that you have no idea about test automation, what you have done basically, right? So this question can be asked in various different way. So let me actually explain you what are the different way that this question can be asked. Then we will basically talk about the entire things about it, right? The first thing is they can ask you, tell me about your test automation framework architecture, right? Very straightforward. Second question they can ask you, explain me what are the different components your test automation framework has, right? Or maybe they will ask you how your test automation is structured, right? What are the different components, how they are integrated together, right? Various different way, but whole process is this is the entire test automation architecture that you need to understand what are the different components, because based on all of this component the entire test automation structure is basically built. All right, now let us try to understand, because as I said, this question is so important that without knowing this question I think it's probably not worth going for the interview if you're applying for that role, right? So that's the reason I haven't tried to answer this question so far in the series or in the entire YouTube channel, and very less people will talk about it because this needs real type of understanding, real experience. When you have worked on extensively, then only you can explain, right? So what I have done, I have taken it in a very simple plain or I would say very generic way. I have tried to keep the components that are required here in a very generic way, and this particular test test automation framework architecture is specifically for that you can explain for your ETL test automation framework. Okay, so let me actually, before that, I will talk about something that a test automation framework should have. What are the different features that it should have? And then when I explain all of this thing, different component, how they are integrated together, and then it will make sense to see that whether those features are basically implemented in this framework or not. Okay, so you can basically remember this particular picture and you can basically draw it when they ask you, right? But before that, let me basically explain you what should be the different type of feature the one good test automation framework should have it. Okay, so let me just write it here, couple of things. Okay, so the very first feature, it should have modularity, guys. Okay, modularity. Modularity, it also basically enhances your reusability. Okay, which means you can basically reuse some sort of code that you have already written if you have written into modular way. Okay, so that we will talk about it, how it is basically in this framework itself that we have kept it here, right? Second question is basically the maintainability, right? Maintainability, all of this are features basically which a good test automation framework should have it, right? And then we should also have configurability, right? You should be able to configure it so easily. It should not be having hard coding value, so your configuration should be kept aside. Okay, now number 4 is basically scalability. You should be able to scale up your test automation framework very easily, right? So these are a couple of things that you should be keeping in your mind when you design a proper framework, right? And this gives you some futuristic design, right? Because you should be able to um, have this vision that in future, let's say your test automation can grow very substantial, right? So these are the few features that a test automation framework should have it. And now when I explain you, I'll tell you where and all we are actually able to achieve all of these features, right? The good test automation feature. Okay, now so let us try to understand first each of this particular each of the component within this. So what you can explain is that you can draw this picture quickly. You can ask them, okay, I have this framework and let me explain. So you can explain it something. So the very top layer of your test automation framework is basically the configuration, right? This is the configuration, which means you basically put all the different configuration. For example, you might use in your databases. So there are two level of configuration. One is this is very specific to your test automation, and this is more of a your application related. Maybe you want to basically run your test cases into different environment. Let's say you want to run in test, you want to run into UAT, you also want to run into production maybe. Yeah, so your test cases can run into different, so you can actually keep the different database connections, for example, right? I'm just giving you some examples here so you remember it. Let's say you have the database connection. So for test environment database, your host name, port name, user ID different, right? Everything different for different environment, just to give you some idea. So all of those configuration you can keep into the configuration file basically, and that is the very first component which is sitting on the top basically, right? This gives you basically the dynamic way of calling it, or I would also say maintainability, because you're not hard coding the things. So you can also basically just if you need to change anything, you can just go and change it to this configuration, and that entire configuration is reflected to every single test case that you are going to do. So we'll see that how it is basically connected, but just to know that you can actually put all the configuration. You don't need to basically hard code in your test cases. All right. Now, second level of configuration is basically Pytest, right? Pytest is the testing framework. So this is basically for the Python. So we are talking about the Python ETL automation. So I'll also talk about it a little bit. The automation framework that we are talking, you can call this as a data driven, okay? Data driven plus modular framework. All right. So our framework is basically, you can call it data driven modular framework, and this is the exactly the architecture that you can define, right? Okay, I'll talk about why it is data driven and all. Right now, this is basically Pytest, which is supporting the Python test execution basically, right? Now you can put lot of Pytest or different configuration related to how you handle the test cases. For example, you would like to categorize your test cases into different category. Maybe you can categorize some test cases into smoke, some test cases maybe regression, or you want to basically run some of the test cases, some of the test cases you can skip it, right? So there are different way that you can put into this configuration, okay? And you can also put the retry logic. For example, your test cases are failing, right? Some of the test cases are failing. You can actually put the retry logic. For example, some flaky test cases are there. Maybe while running, maybe some database connection issue or interrupted, maybe database is down. Then you can actually put some retry logic within this particular Pytest configuration that will retry two times, three times. And you can also say that how much time like you want to wait for. Let's say the test case failed immediately, you want to give 5 minutes. Okay, after 5 minutes you want to retry. So all of those things you can actually put into the Pytest configuration, right? Now that's basically about the Pytest configuration, and this keeps all of these things, right, related to your test case, specifically for the test case related configuration, that you can keep it here. Now, the second layer that you can see is basically the utility layer here, right? So again, this is going to give you maintainability and configurability feature. You can achieve it using this configuration. Now, second level. So I'll say this is the first level, right? First level. Second level, basically this sits on the second level, let's say, right? Now you have the utilities, right? And what are those utilities? So utilities, for example, you can basically keep some reusable logic for test cases, right? If I can give you example, let's say you can write some code that can basically read files, okay? Different type of files, for example, or you can read different databases maybe, right? Read databases, and you can put the logic, okay? You can put, let's say if you supply Oracle, then it will connect to the Oracle database, and that will fetch the data internally. When you say Oracle, it will fetch the data from this configuration and connect to that data. When you say, let's say DB2 or maybe Sybase, any kind of database, right? if you put it here, it will read that particular database, right? It will create a connection, right? So all of those things. Also, you can also put something related to maybe utility can be something comparing two data sets altogether. So all of those utility files you can do it. This basically increases the feature called reusability because you're reusing it, right? Because see, you can call a database multiple times, right? You can basically call read different type of files. So you basically write it once and read it again and again, use it again and again. Just call this particular function, right? So this particular component utility function, this is basically increases your reusability, right? Now, the fixture, right? Fixture is again very related to, I would say, Pytest feature. And here what we do is basically we try to define some sort of prerequisite. For example, you want to keep a database connection, right? You want to before you even your test cases. So this is something called, let's say, before test or after test, right? So whatever you want to do basically before and after running the test cases, all of those things you can actually maintain it, right? So this basically increases your again, I would say this is reusability because you define the fixture once and call it again. So this is the second level, right? Now the third level is really the level of the core level, I would say, isn't it? This is the core level, and this is something I would say test case, right? This is the level 3. In that particular level, these are the core level. I would say this is the largest component because you put entire test cases, everything is here. This is the core of the entire framework, isn't it? Every single test cases that you are writing it here, it can be different type of test cases, guys, right? It can be, let's say you are validating the data extraction, right? Whether the data extraction that we have done from various sources, that works fine. Data transformation is done or not, right? Maybe data quality is done or not properly. All are different type of test cases you can actually put it here, right? So this is the largest level, I will say. And this particular label is basically something that will be connected to your configuration utility because you are basically writing the standalone test cases that will be calling the different features. That's why there are arrows you can see here, right? Now together with this, it also needs some data, isn't it? Because you might need to supply some data, and I would say here this third level itself, right? So this data also sits at the same level because you basically call this data to run certain test cases, maybe input data, test data, etc., right? That's the reason it basically code is same, but you can put the different data sets basically, and that increases, or that feature is basically called as data driven. I told you our framework is data driven plus modular. And why it is modular? Because do you see there are various components to handle the different things. That's why they are modular. All of these are different modules, isn't it? And they are integrated together. We are able to do it, and that increases basically your reusability or maintainability, etc., all of those things. That's why this is called data driven feature, and we are using this data. And now the actual core test cases, basically our test cases are kept it here, and the moment we run the test cases, it basically call off all of these things that is needed for execution of this particular test cases, right? And then what it does basically post execution, right, it basically sends you the matched result, mismatched result. Maybe you can actually keep it as a output maybe. So all of this layer that are basically the output. This is the fourth layer, I would say, right? Fourth level, I would say. And these are basically different outputs. This is also a log output that is basically capturing how your test automation is working. This will help you to diagnose any kind of error or any kind of exceptions, etc. And also a beautiful report you can see that you can share with your management, you can share with anybody, just to say that, hey, this is the overall test result. It can be in HTML, it can be in different format altogether, right? But the core thing is basically once test execution is done, you'll be getting this different fourth level data sets. Basically it can be log, reports, match, excel file, etc. That is basically coming out of showing the mismatched or matched results that you can actually do it for further analysis of your test execution. Yeah. So these are basically the core component that a test automation framework should have it. Now, I'm not going into deeper about it because this is not really the intent of it, but if you can explain all of these things together, right, then it is going to be a very good impression on the interviewer, and there are very higher chance that you can get selected. Now I want to tell one more thing, right? So this is the entire framework, right? This is basically framework that you have designed, let's say. Now you can also integrate this entire framework, right? This entire framework, for example, you can also integrate with CI/CD, okay? CI/CD, and before that you basically push this code into GitHub. Maybe all of these things you can actually, so if I can say this entire framework, it can actually push into, let's say, Git repository, GitHub repository, and you can schedule some CI/CD jobs basically, right? And this is something, let's say you can put something called Jenkins or GitLab, right? Anything it can be, but entirely this is the end-to-end integration. I would say that integration with GitHub and CI/CD, Jenkins, and this automation framework. If you can explain all of these things together, this is going to be basically enhancing a lot of your chances of selection. And this single question had the ability to make a big impact on interviewer basically, because if you explain all of these things in a proper nice way, what each of this component does within your framework, and then it is it's like a very high chance of your selection, right? Now let me basically just tell you very quickly what happens basically one more time, like in terms of execution, how it happens, right? So it looks like, okay, let me take this color. So what happens, guys? First of all, as I tell, the moment you start execution, test start executing, let's say you say Pytest and then you issue the commands basically. What will happen is it first of all, it reads the configuration file. So first level, this reads the configuration file. Second, is initiates the fixtures as well, because fixtures should be run before test and after test also, right? So those fixtures are basically prerequisite for your test. So those fixtures are basically getting executed. I will write it number one, and then fixtures are going to get executed. I'm talking about the execution, the flow basically, right? And the third, what happens is basically it loads the test data. So this is okay, third, basically this is the test data, and once test data is basically done, this fourth, I would say, this test case basically starts executing. I'm just talking not level, but the sequence I'm talking. This test case it starts start executing because it has got all the prerequisites. It got the data, it got the configuration, it got what test you have to execute, and it also got the configuration, whether you want to run it in test, UAT, or prod, whatever it is, right? Based on all these connections. And once this actually is done internally, within this, right, it basically uses a lot of other things. For example, it actually pulls the configuration, because while test cases are running, it will pull the utilities, because you are actually calling all of these utilities within your test cases, isn't it? And then finally it generates the reports, right? So it basically can generate the reports here. Let's say this is number 6, all right? And after that it can, let's say, number 6, and reports will keep generating obviously, and log will also go. So I can say, maybe I'll just, if I want to put it, let's say 7, and then I would say all of these are also results, isn't it? So all of they can actually sit on the same level. I would say 6, 6, 6, 6. Everything basically is the output basically, right? And then you can share these particular results, whatever they need. They might need, let's say, test report in HTML format, or maybe they want the Excel sheet in the match or mismatch reports. If you want to investigate with your BAs, or maybe your SMAs, etc., right? All of those things can be shared with them. But this is how the sequence of the execution when you trigger the test automation framework, right? Okay, so that's what I wanted to basically explain you guys. But if you need in detail everything, what happens on each of this component, what are the different things that basically are kept in everything, I can do another video, guys. But know that you can understand all of these things only when you have certain level of good understanding, or you have done some sort of framework basically in your projects, right? Or you have learned something about it, right? Because this question, that's why I'm saying this question is very critical for any selection or rejection of yours, because you cannot simply explain it. If they might ask you, hey, can you tell me what all the things goes into, for example, test data, right? What kind of test data you use it? If you have not used it, you will not be able to tell basically what is that. Very, very simple question, right? Or maybe they might ask, hey, what do you put in the fixture, or let's say conf test? What are those fixtures? How does they execute? What is the sequence of it, right? Let's say I want to run the test cases into certain order. Let's say test case number 2 first, and then 3 and 4 and then 1, something like that, in different order. How do we handle it? How do you put into a fixture, etc., etc., right? So all of those things actually you will be able to explain only when you know that, right? So as I'm expecting that you guys know little bit about this, and if you don't know, you have to learn it. Obviously there is no other way. But if you need me to basically do one more video or couple of more videos, you let me know that you need. So what you can type it, you need, you can just put your comments, let's say need more videos, something like that, yeah, so that I can basically go and do component level videos that will explain every single component, what should go, what will not go, and all of those things basically, yeah. So that's it, I think, for today. I think this is a very, very important question. As I said, please keep this diagram in mind, okay? You can keep it somewhere on your drawing area, wherever you study and all, right? You can keep it and try to draw these boxes, different boxes, and exactly the same box you can actually explain when you go for the interview, right? And trust me, if you are able to explain in this way, nobody can reject you. I'll tell you, nobody can reject you, at least on this particular question, right? So I think that's all for this video. I'll see you soon in the next video, but don't forget to comment if you need the further videos on explanation on each of this component, and then I will be doing the next videos, and that's where we will go deep dive into it. All right. Okay. Until we meet next time, happy learning. God bless you and take care.